Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for those of you who are not in the Pacific time zone. Hope everybody's having a great Thursday so far. I'm going to go ahead and just get started here. Today we're going to be talking about migrating InfoPath data to SharePoint lists, and this is kind of a part two. We talked about it a little bit earlier this month, and we're talking about it some more. We've got more things to share with you. I've got a little bit of troubleshooting stuff for you, and I've got some kind of cool things to show you as well. If you can't hear me, I don't know what to say, but it does require audio. Basic agenda. A lot of times I do the presentation and then do the demo, but I've got two kind of disparate things going on today, so I'm going to present, break and demo, present. I hope that works for everybody. And then as always, we'll have time for questions and answers. Do feel free to type questions in as you have them, and we will address them when we are done. So as you think of a question, type it in. We're happy to answer questions. So you've probably heard that Microsoft has deprecated InfoPath. They put up an announcement stating that they are retiring it. And you might be wondering what you should do. You could be feeling a little bit like Wiley here with you've been going full speed ahead with your InfoPath forms, and now here you are. You have hit the edge of the cliff. What happens next? And I just want to remind you that, we're here to help, just as we have been with InfoPath. We can help you as well with after InfoPath. We really believe very strongly in eForms and eForm ecosystems. We believe very strongly in the importance of having electronic ways to capture and report on your data. I don't think any of us want to go back to those old days of routing paper forms in internal manila envelopes through offices. And we're here to help. We can help guide your decisions now. We can help guide you as you move forward. We're working very hard to develop tools to help with migrations, and so this is obviously very important to us, just as it is to you, and I just want to remind you we're here for you. The deprecation announcement, and I hesitate to be reading things, so super closely, to be parsing every bit of detail in an announcement, but really what are we left to do? We're given announcements like these and we have to read them closely, and in the deprecation announcement, it said, that Microsoft is working on migration guidance along with their work on developing tools for forms technology, and they stress that until they've got more detailed information about the path they're planning for Microsoft Forms tools, they encourage us to keep using InfoPath. And since they are emphasizing that they are working on migration, apparently they're aware of the fact that a lot of us have been relying on this technology. So I take this to be, first off, a very comforting kind of a direction, and while things feel like they're in flux, for right now, I'm going to keep going with InfoPath, and while I explore other options, while we work on migration strategies and technologies, I think just because things are in flux doesn't mean we need to necessarily feel like we have run off the edge of the cliff. So today what I want to talk about is, I call it workarounds for issues with SharePoint lists. One is, one section is sort of workarounds, the next section is sort of just, it's just random coolness. It's a way to move out of lists. So first let's talk about migration planning. What is migration planning and why do I need to plan it? And this is for your list migration. If you are planning on importing XML that you've created with an InfoPath form into lists, you need to know what's the structure of your data, and that means you need to be cognizant of the arrangement of your data source task pane. You look at your data source task pane and you need to have a sense of what goes where, what should be in its own list. In general, I think we might consider all data at one level to go into one list with each repeating structure going into its own list. But there may also be additional breaks within that. It could be that you have non-repeating data that makes sense in its own list because it makes more sense to break things up a little bit. So you want to take a minute and reflect upon the business nature of your data, not just the outline structure of your data. You need to be aware of your data types. You want to pay attention to those. Don't just look at what you see on the form. Don't be, especially if somebody else designed it. Don't look at the form and assume because there's a date picker somebody used a date field. Make sure you take a look at that task pane and have a good sense of what the data types are of each field. And also you want to be aware of surprises. And by surprises I mean when you open up the form and you've filled it out, perhaps there's an entire section that relies on a secondary data source for display data. That's something you want to be aware of, that data is not actually in your existing XML. Perhaps there are a lot of drop-downs that are using IDs for their values and display text that's user-friendly. You definitely want to be aware of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but especially if they are SharePoint list IDs, this is going to change what you do when you create your list. So you want to review your form and you want to definitely make some notes. Now we have our tool that you saw in the February 13th webinar, the InfoPath to SharePoint list tool. And this can allow you to bulk migrate your existing XML. You might have used it with Q rules, but it has always had this bulk import feature as well. And so you could leverage that, copy your XML out of SharePoint, use the tool, get everything uploaded into lists. And that's definitely a great tool for getting your data into lists. But you have to know what you're going to map. When we demoed the tool and we did the mapping, we quickly just kind of walked through and mapped this and mapped that. And you saw the expense report form sample that we use for a lot of things. And we're pretty familiar with that data source. But you do need to review your form schema, investigate what's flat and what's nested, figure out what goes in its own list. Aside from things like date times, you want to be aware of whether you've got any rich text. We have a specific field. There's a checkbox in the mapping form that you can select if you've got rich text, because we have to treat in the code in that form, we have to treat rich text a little differently than we do plain text in order to make sure that it gets imported correctly. Again, we talk about the IDs. If your form is storing IDs from data sources outside of SharePoint, it may not be, depending on how many you've got and what the data is, it may not be necessarily a good candidate to just directly upload to a list. So that's definitely one of the things that as a forms expert you are going to have to assess, whether or not this particular form, these particular XML are good candidates to be uploaded into SharePoint, migrated to SharePoint. And sorry for the detour, but that is one of your responsibilities at this point is when you start planning for migration, you want to consider the location that makes sense. And if I have a form where the actual XML is full of GUIDs that are associated back to a SQL database, it may not be that a list is the right place for it. But if you're using SharePoint lists as sources for your drop-downs, then it may be a great place for it because you can use lookup columns. If we're storing IDs in our form, we'll create lookup columns in the corresponding list for things that also exist on your SharePoint site where you're importing these. If you have repeating data, generally you'll have one list for the main data and additional lists for each repeating group. But again, pay attention to the business sense there. It may be that your form schema has a lot of things that aren't repeating but don't belong together. So you'll want to make some calculated decisions there as to what things are like each other, right? And finally, when we did our demo, we showed loading up a full folder of XML. We just grabbed our folder and we uploaded it. But trust me, we had tested that before. right? And so test with a small number first. And I know you guys don't need to hear that, but I think it's always good to think in terms of testing in a limited fashion so that if something does go awry, you don't like the outcome, you have a more limited cleanup to handle for. So briefly here before, you guys, I talk too much. I always run us out of time. Before we move on to part 2, the first thing I want to talk about or show you is this is what the actual mapping XML looks like. So the mapping that the code in the form is using to upload your items looks like this. And one of the reasons I want to show you this is you can see we've got an attribute here for whether or not it's rich text, and we're addressing that, or whether or not it's ID or an attachment. The other thing we have here that we don't have exposed yet in the form itself is date, to help us handle correctly for date times. One of the issues with uploading a date time is this is what a date time looks like in XML, and that's why I say you want to take a look at your XML. And by the way, for a text editor, I'm using Notepad++ with the XML plugin. I really encourage you to give that a try for a free text editor that does nice XML formatting and highlighting. So as you can see here, in my date, I have a T right here between my date and my time, and SharePoint is not going to care for that T. It's going to want a space there. We actually handle for that in the code if you set isDate to true, so that's just a little something. We've got it in our list of fixes to get that exposed in the UI, but for now that's something that may help you with something like this. The other thing you'll run into possibly is with your person and groups. Here's a person from a person picker. And there is nothing here necessarily that SharePoint is going to like if you map this to a person or group column. What SharePoint likes is something along the lines of, I meant to type it up here, it's a -1 pound semicolon and then the username. And what SharePoint will do with this, without the domain you'll notice, what SharePoint will do with this is it will go then look up the user's ID and populate a person or group correctly. You can semicolon delimit these, and I do have a blog post on this. There's a link included in the notes with the slide presentation, or you can just find it on InfoPath Dev. So there are some specific needs in terms of what data SharePoint will take. Don't despair if you look at your XML and you're like, oh no, I can never upload this to SharePoint because it's XML. So we can apply a transform to it and get it in the shape it needs to be to go into your list. And so it's not that all is lost if things aren't in the right shape now. It just means heads up, keep an eye on that data, make sure you know what it really looks like, and that needs to be part of your planning. And again, like I mentioned, I'm going to say it again just because I'm OCD, is that when you create, if you've got SharePoint list item IDs, when you create your lists, use lookups for those. Obviously, there's going to be another level of complexity there if, in fact, your SharePoint lists are on a bunch of different sites, right? Because we can only do a lookup onto the same site. So that's another thing that you have to kind of have a heads-up approach to. Okay, so those are sort of some of the things to watch out for when you plan for your migration and when you get ready to do your mapping. Again, it's not hopeless if things aren't quite where they need to be. XSLT can do an amazing job of straightening up XML, getting it into the shape it needs to go, but it may be something you need a little help with. It may be something you need to work with a little bit to get the hang of what needs to happen to that XML to get it right. You can always try a manual modification and then use the tool to upload into the list and see if you get better results. So experiment a little and get help as needed. Okay? So moving on to something else, which is one thing you can do with your data after you have it in a list, and that is you can import those lists for use in an Access web app. And you might wonder why I'm bringing up Access web apps. I'll highlight that this bold word of Access is my highlighting, not theirs. Microsoft wasn't giving us a secret message in this by highlighting Access, but the announcement does specify that Access is one of the technologies they're focusing on, and you can see that in Access 2013. So there's reasons why you might want to think about using Access web apps. And I distracted myself there for a second because I want to launch a quick poll just about what of the following, what of the technologies you're currently using, just to get a sense for what people are using. So I popped it up. You guys can take that poll. Reasons to use Access web apps include things like easy SharePoint integration. If you've used SharePoint 2013, Office 365, you've seen the new app ecosystem. And an Access web app is a SharePoint web app, period. It is a SharePoint web app. So when you create an Access web app, you're creating a SharePoint web app, which is excellent. It means you're using some of the latest and greatest there. The theme of the site is going to apply to your app. I will tell you, yesterday when I was working with my Access web app, I kept looking online to see what I could possibly do to change the color scheme. And then the light bulb came on, and I thought, oh, gee, I guess instead of doing anything to change the color scheme, I could actually change my SharePoint site theme. And so it's completely integrated there. Access has templates available for kind of a quick jump start on a new project. And I don't know if anybody else remembers the sample forms that came with InfoPath 2003. I do. I really enjoyed those, and they made development easier because you had some idea, you had a sense of what could be done. And most of us, when we are presented with something new, we do not understand what all we can do with it, especially if it's at all rich or multi-leveled. And so by having templates, it opens up the doors for you to quickly and easily experiment with these. You can get a good sense of what's going on. And finally, the reason that just kind of knocked me off my chair yesterday, that got me excited about this technology, is there is major functionality that is just auto-magically created for you when you create your tables. So just so you guys kind of know what I'm seeing in the poll, so far a lot of people are really using InfoPath 2010 and on-premises SharePoint 2010. We've got an 85% InfoPath 2010, 62% SharePoint 2010. Maybe, and I think numbers are shifting, so I should be quiet. I'm seeing a steady 19% of InfoPath 2013. But yeah, a smaller rate of Office 365 among this group, 11%, and with 15% using some SharePoint 2013. So those are interesting numbers, and that does imply as well that, hey, for all you folks that are in 2010, does the retirement announcement have as much impact on you? Is your organization going to be moving from 2010 2 jumps ahead at some point, or will you be moving 1 jump ahead? That's something you can have insight into by looking at your organization's past history and adoption. If you work someplace that took, a very long time to move to Windows 7 and 2010 Office, it may take a very long time to make the next move, so keep it in mind. Now there's a few gotchas here. And this is where I make some mistakes to let you make fewer mistakes. Look, if you're going to do an Access web app off a SharePoint list at this time, and that was stated very clearly in the article I read from Microsoft, at this time, linked tables from SharePoint are read-only. That gives me the sense that perhaps that in the future may change, but for right now it means you import your tables, you create your Access web app, and your lists were just a migration step along the way. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. You want to make sure you select import because there's functionality that you're not going to get if you do a linked table. You can do read-only, you can do some display stuff, but you don't get the magic. Okay. There is the possibility that you, like I, will import the wrong thing on your lookups. You don't want to import display values instead of IDs. You want the IDs so that you can connect your tables. And also, relationships are not going to be created for you You have to create them yourself. This is very easy. I'll show you how to do it. And this is all just wizard stuff. You walk through, you click this, you click that, you say, okay, you're up and running. It takes very little time, and if you mess up, you can start over very easily. So don't hesitate to experiment here. If you're using on-premises SharePoint instead of Office 365, you may have some configuration required. If you're using SharePoint 2010, I believe in Access 2010 they had the beginning of the web app ecosystem, so that's something you might want to investigate. I'm using 2013 and Office 365, so just be aware you might have to do a little research. You may have to get a SharePoint admin involved. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close my poll. And apparently I wasn't showing my screen the past few slides, and I apologize for that. Polls are new for me. Maybe I was sharing my screen. It's all kind of a big mystery, but I just saw a message saying that polls must be closed to share screen, so I have a feeling that perhaps I wasn't. I'm going to pop back a couple slides, and here's the screenshot of selecting import instead of a link. Here's the screenshot of the import display values instead of IDs. You want to deselect that, and you guys know how to get your hands on the slides. I'm going to pop through this as well just for the sake of the video. Here's a couple links on configuration, and I apologize for that, and I learned something new about polls in webinars. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and demo a little bit more, and what I want to show you now is my web app. And so this is my Access web app based on, it's the same expense report data. It says expense report web app dash linked, but that is a lie. These are imported tables. I had a naming issue. I assumed I was going to be trying to link them again. This was before I learned my valuable lesson. And so if I click through this, you know, these are the same forms that that were imported in the previous webinar. You can see down here it shows my list of items. I click this and up comes my new item. I've got two tabs. One shows my entertainment, one shows my gifts. These are all separate lists that I imported. I had expense report, items, entertainment, and gifts. And so from these different lists, I've got this ability to add new items. This will pop up a form for me. I've got all of these little, you know, nice looking UI, web controls. I've got the look and feel of my site. I've got all of these things. I'm going to pop up another quick poll, and I promise to close it promptly to start sharing again. So given what you just saw, kind of that click through, being able to click on things, having the different tabs, you know, how long do you think it took? And so the question is, how long do you think it took for me to create this web app that looks like this and has all of this integrated functionality? I'm going to give this just a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to learn my lesson here, and I'm going to close the poll so I start screen sharing again. I appreciate you guys hanging out for my learning curve, and we're just going to do one more second, and I'm going to close this now. Okay, so in general, most people said, yeah, 5 minutes, right? 34% of you thought maybe 5 hours, and 7% of you thought maybe 5 days. So the 5-minute people, you folks aren't going to be as impressed by what I'm going to show you later as the 5-hour people and the 5-day people. It really is that easy. When you create your web app, all of these forms, let me drag this navigation pane a little bit wider, all of these forms right here were created for me, okay? Every single one of those forms were created for me. The minute I added my tables, those forms were created for me. The one thing I had to do, and I created a new app using the same tables so I could show you this. The one thing I had to do was I had to join my tables. And so I'm going to give you a little heads up here. Like any new technology, sometimes things can be a little buggy. So what I found yesterday was I had an occasional crash when I was working with this, and so I just want to give you a heads up. I found that everything recovered quickly from the crash, but I want to let you know that there may be there may be a crash. So here in Design View, I've got my expense report ID. It was imported as a number, and because of the way I imported the data, I am, because of the way I imported the data, I know that these expense report IDs link back to my expense reports because I imported the linked data, the lookups, as the IDs. Okay, so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to change that from number to lookup, and I get a wizard. Well, I want it to get the values from another table or query, and I want them from expense report, and I'm going to say OK. And now I'm going to save, and it's going to warn me, and I'm okay with that warning. Basically, it just said, hey, some stuff's going to get changed, might get changed to a shorter size when it gets changed to a lookup. But the fact is, I know what was in my data, and I know what was in those columns. Okay, so I went ahead and I added a lookup there. And what happened is this expense report list automatically added this tab with the expense report item stuff. This is the same thing you see right here. So it's this section right here with the tab. If we look at the auto-created form for expense report item, and we pop that open, you can see right now that does not have a related item on it. But if I close these forms and I adjust this, I'm going to adjust just gift, and I'm going to open that in design view. I'm going to change this guy from a number to a lookup. You can see I'm really breaking a sweat here. And the gift relates to the item. There we go. I say OK. I click Save. I say yes to that warning. It's going to save my changes. And what we will see here is that in my list form, my expense report item list form now, do you see how it automatically added that for me? So all of those tabs, all of that functionality of clicking the items and having the new modal dialog pop up to allow me to enter related items, all of this was added for me simply by changing a few columns to a lookup. And that's when I said things get auto-magically added, that is definitely what I mean, is all of these things are added for me. Now, one thing I also looked up yesterday when I was looking at things was, well, you know, I maybe don't want all of these things here. These are called tiles, so you know. New terminology is always exciting when we learn a new thing, and they can, of course, be hidden. Right? You can just hide these, and I'm just going to hide that one, and I'm going to hide that one. And you can rename them. Oh, one little thing I read was, by the way, deleting the tile actually deletes the table. So that's a little, little heads up. And so I'll just save this and launch it. And then now what will happen is my tiles on the side no longer show. The only tile I have is this expense report tile, and again I can just go ahead and go through these. I've got a nice data sheet view that of course I can make some changes to in the designer if I had stuff I wanted to not show here. And it's just got this real nice kind of SharePoint look and feel, nice integration. It's using my site theme. If I had a background image here, that would be showing up. If I changed my site theme, here's one I had open earlier with a blue theme, you can see the look and feel changes to go with it. So that's just a real quick tour of an Access web app. I encourage you to look into these. I encourage you to think about these in terms of, part of your migration strategy, part of your migration plan. Maybe things go into a list and then you pop them as tables into an Access web app. I feel like these give you a lot of functionality for very little effort. I think they've got a very modern look and feel. Yes, you lack some of that rich, design capability, of course. It lacks some of the complex controls, but there are things like macros, which are effectively rules. There's validation available to you, so you can set validation on fields. You can pop up validation messages. You can add logic that can help, constrain what's entered, or that causes an action to cause another action to happen. And I encourage you to start taking a look at these so you've got a sense of what's possible there in terms of one part of your migration strategy. And since, of course, you can also use, you can import from a variety of sources, it's not a SharePoint list that might be available to you in terms of migration strategies here. So that's about all I've got for you. I hope you enjoyed this. We've got things open up for questions. If anybody has any questions, and I do see some questions here. I'm going to pop this out so I can answer them. Okay, and let me see. Okay, and so it looks like some questions have been answered. Oh, I forgot to, yeah, I popped up the poll and then I messed up. Thanks everybody for getting back to me. Sorry about that. And let's see, I see one question asking if I can briefly show the starting point that I imported just for reference. You can start from Access or you can start from SharePoint. You can go to SharePoint and say you want to create a new app, but from Access I just open it up and click Custom Web App. The next thing that comes up, it allows me to select a site, you know, and I can pick the site that we're going to use. Sorry, you've got to listen to me type. I'm just going to use that. And we hit create. And I've got a technical error because I forgot an S. Got to get the URL right. So particular. And it's going to go ahead and get things created. So at that point, then we start walking through the table import screen, and you click whether you're going to import or link and so forth. I'll just address another question I see here is how do you deploy the Access web app form to multiple users? Well, it's in SharePoint. So this thing, if we go to, I wasn't as clear on that as I could have been. If we go to, it's a web app, so if I go back to my site here I am on my site, it's my test site, and right here in my recent, or you could have a link anywhere, of course, here is my web app right there. Jason had an excellent question about workflow, and I do not know what a workaround is for workflow with Access web apps, and that is an excellent question, and I had not thought about that. So I appreciate you for bringing it up. If anybody has any ideas, definitely pop in with this. So at any rate, there it is from the site. Back we go to Access. So here we are. Here's another new app, and you can see I can create a table from an existing data source. And I just started with SharePoint list. It forgets where I created the app, so I have to tell it again. Blah blah link, and then we select import from here. Okay, and let me pop back. And Jason says that he lost audio. I hope nobody else has. Okay, he's back. And we had another question asking whether or not the web app functionality, it says, did you say that the web app functionality is not available in Access 2010? Hey, if you've got Access 2010 installed, I encourage you to take a look. For some reason, I thought that they introduced Access web apps with Access 2010, SharePoint 2010, but it's not the app ecosystem type of app, so it's not this 2013 brand new app ecosystem. I believe there's some differences. I do not know what the capability is of migration from a 2010 Access web app to a 2013 Access web app. So before you dig in too far to 2010, I really encourage you to make sure you know what's available to you moving forward. But my recollection is that this is something that was started back in 2010, and it's been more fleshed out, and obviously with the app ecosystem things have changed there as well. And let me see if we have anything else that I've missed. I see that we've got one question. It looks like what to do in the list version. Yeah, there was a question earlier that I'm not really sure I understand. It says what to do in the list version. Oh, I see. I see what the question is what can you do in using lists, right? If you migrate, sorry, excuse me all while I think out loud on you. I know that was painful for all of us. I the question, I believe, is, well, if I migrate my InfoPath stuff into SharePoint lists, I'm no longer able to sort of show and hide certain things based on the state of the form. That's very true. You are not. And I did not offhand see anything obvious in Access Web Apps about conditional formatting. That does not mean there is nothing there that couldn't be utilized for something of that nature, because I am not sure at all in depth of what macros can do, whether controls can be removed and added from the web app. It's definitely something I plan to investigate further, and hopefully we'll be having some more webinars on Access Web Apps as we too get our hands around this new technology. I don't know if you guys remember far back enough to the time when you first started using InfoPath, and you just sat there and you looked at it and you were like, what is this thing? This is bewildering. I mean, I had data sources that I hang my head in shame over to this day, and it was because I didn't know what I was doing. It was new, and I didn't know what all was there, and I would put a rule on a field and be surprised it didn't fire when the field didn't change, and so this is new, and I think there's a depth there that we're still trying to uncover, and frankly, like many new things, there's not a ton of information out online. There's the, hey, here's how you start it, here's how you adapt an existing template. So I think there's a lot to discover here, and I think there's some richness and some possibility that is yet to be uncovered, and I also do believe that Microsoft has invested heavily in this, and I think there's a chance that that investment's going to continue. So I'm never going to tell you what pony to bet on, but I think this pony's looking mighty fine. Let's see, do we have to install Office in the ShP server to create Access Web Apps? I don't believe so. I think you have to have Access services enabled. I had a couple of links on one slide that I skated past kind of quickly because I was confused about how polls work. But yeah, there's some configuration that may be required. I will tell you, when I tried one of our in-house SharePoint 2013 servers, I had a failure to create databases when I tried to create an Access app. Did not have time to fully investigate what I needed to configure on that server and moved to Office 365. Oh, folks, if you don't know about this, Office 365, you can get a dev site for a single user. So look into that, because if you set up a single user dev site, then you have a nice place to kind of try some of these things. You're not messing with your corporate environment. You don't have to bug your SharePoint admin if you aren't one yourself. And definitely take a look at having your own dev site. It gives you a great place to, oh, look what I can do, and then you can go show somebody, and then the SharePoint admin says, well, yes, we can enable these things. So it just gives you a nice talking point there. We have a question from Celeste. Both have to be 2013 or both 2010, Access and SharePoint. Well, the Access web app in Access 2013 is intended to work in the SharePoint 2013 app ecosystem. My instinct there is the answer to that question is yes. You want to not mix and match your Access and SharePoint version. I do not think they are going to mix and match, but that's just instinct. Somebody else is asking, Dick asks, what is an Access web app? It seems like it is a separate SharePoint object within SharePoint. What is the relation to a site collection? So the app is created and deployed to the site collection, at which point it can be added to a site on that site collection. I did not look into any detail in terms of at what level web apps are available down. Again, we're going to go off my instinct. My thought is here that when we deploy an app at the root level of our site, that it's available to other sites in the site collection, but I could be wrong. I've been wrong about such guesses before. Fortunately, there's good information available online about app ecosystem, and actually, I've got your email address. I'll take a look and get back to you on that particular question, Dick. And Thomas asks, where should we go for finding more about the single user dev site for Office 365? Well, let's all Google together. You know, I cannot remember Office 365 developer site. I cannot remember what I was doing when I ended up creating mine, but if I go here to MSDN, I see sign up for an Office 365 developer site. So I would recommend you start right here and see if that'll get you going. And you'll end up with some weird email address, blah, 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 at microsoftonline.com. And it's a single user site, but boy, it gives you a great place to try stuff. Greatly encourage that. Gives you a chance to try new things. Okay, so Dick, I'm going to get back to you on your question about site collection and the Access web app. It'll take me just a few minutes after we hop off the call to figure out where where my new app that I saved up at the root level is available. So I'll know that here shortly, and I can email you on that if that's your email address. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. I'm not seeing anything pop up. Let me show you real quick our upcoming webinars. You know, hey, next week we're going to be at the SharePoint conference. We're hanging out at the Formotus booth. Come see us. We've got cool stuff to show you. So definitely come take a look. It looks like we're going to be talking a little bit more about Access in an upcoming webinar with InfoPath data stored in Azure. You guys can read. You don't need me to read this to you. But we're continuing to take a look at all of the available options out there and join us while we experiment with these things and take a look at them, compare them, and start coming up with maybe some of our own migration plans. You know, Microsoft says they're working on them, but that doesn't mean the rest of us can't also work on them too. So there's lots of great stuff in store for us. The only thing you can count on in technology is it is going to change. Okay, so we know this stuff is going to happen, and as technologists, we need to just kind of say, whoa, stuff changed, cool, what's next? And I hope you guys are just as excited as I am about watching what unfolds before us and what great things are in store for us in terms of upcoming tools that we are going to be able to build rockin' things with to capture data and report on data, because that is the thing that never goes away, right? We always have to get that data in and aggregate that data and expose it back out so that you know that's always going to be here. We're here to help you. Check out our new site, formspo.com. Don't look at my picture there. I look like a mad woman. I assure you most times I do not look like I just ate a kitten for breakfast. We've got, you know, all of these different things we can help you with. We can help you figure out migration strategies. We can help you figure out ways to extend what you've currently got. You know, we can help you with maintenance planning, and we can help you with migration planning. So give us a call, you know, hop online and find us. We're here to help you, and we care about your success. So I hope everybody has a fantastic day, a fantastic rest of the week. It looks like I only went over by 1 minute, which is a new record for me. We'll pop this stuff up online. Check out Access Web Apps. I really encourage you to get the hang of that. And we'll talk to you again soon. Have a great week. Thanks.